Hi everyone, I'm Geri, and sitting across from me is Tom. We are the founders of TomKings Kennel. Our mission is to breed French Bulldogs that are healthy, happy, and beautiful, and to find them families who will truly love them. And in today's talk, I'll be grilling Tom about what makes a Frenchie healthy, what makes a Frenchie happy, since he's been working with them day and night for over 13 years. He screens them genetically, looks at the breeding, what makes a Frenchie beautiful, how to breed them, and how to truly love them so that this mission can be realized. So now I'm going to ask some questions that will debunk many myths about French Bulldogs, whether they're true or not. For instance, why there are so many unhealthy Frenchies in the world, and why we hear so many horror stories on the internet about French Bulldogs. And I've put together the top 7 questions about whether these myths are actually true or not. So very briefly, is every single French Bulldog really just genetic trash? In your opinion, what makes a French Bulldog sick?
Well, there are several factors. Genetic screening is the most important, of course, and the way the breeder keeps the dogs and later the puppies, their upbringing, feeding, and exercise. Every single aspect of this is very important, and it results in a healthy, happy dog for the families. Each part is truly significant.
To me, it seems like we screen the parents of French Bulldogs more thoroughly than we screen ourselves before having children. I have a daughter, you have a son, so do you think that's truly the case?
Well, yes, I often find myself smiling at that too, because it is quite funny that we always seem to screen a dog more thoroughly than we do our own genetics before having a child. So it's one of those. It's a very interesting thing, but it's necessary. And I think it's becoming more important for people too, as they're screening much more now than before. But the same applies to dogs, because nobody wants to raise a sick child or a dog that's ill for its entire life.
What living conditions do you think should be mandatory for a responsible, ethical breeder?
Well, first of all, it's important not to have too many animals, too many dogs at one breeder, because they can't care for them properly. So it's very important that for a family who does this, there should really only be as many dogs as they can spend several hours with on a daily basis. So the dogs must be treated almost like family members. And then you've already solved issues that could cause illnesses that might only show up years later. For example, constant exercise, feeding, house training for puppies, or how to behave with other dogs. So with French Bulldogs, you have to watch out for stairs too, like jumping down or up from high places. You need to train them out of this from a young age, because otherwise they're prone to spinal issues or knee problems. But we pay attention to these things right from the start, and then there won't be any trouble.
So to summarize, do I understand correctly that you believe the French Bulldog breed itself isn't a genetic disaster? The question is really how they're being bred. So it really comes down to the fact that a sick Frenchie or French Bulldog most likely comes from a puppy mill where they're bred mainly for profit and not for the genuine love of the dog or true appreciation for the breed. Would you agree with that?
Well, yes, I've noticed that many people don't care if one of the parents carries some kind of disease, and they just keep breeding the dogs anyway, thinking it won't cause any issues, and they don't care if the puppy ends up being sick in its new home. They're just thinking about the money it brings in, so they don't care. Since they're just dogs and they think it's fine, they'll just buy another one. So this just doesn't fly with us, because it's important for the dog to live a long and healthy life.
I really, really like the way things work at TomKings where you don't have many dogs in one place. Could you tell me how you came up with this idea?
Yes, it developed because at first the breeding was done at my place. So the same thing would have happened as with others. The demand kept growing, and I realized I couldn't give every single dog individual attention anymore. And so I made the decision to involve other breeders in the process. And in this way, all of the parent pairs eventually ended up living with caring families. And they're raised in a family environment there too. So both the puppies and the adult dogs feel good. It's not like they're locked up in one place and stay there all day. Instead, they're outside running around, coming and going, and they can pay just as much attention to the newborn dogs and the litters. So it seems like this approach has really worked out.
What other health screenings are necessary besides DNA tests to check the dog's genetics? What other screenings do you recommend that an ethical breeder would definitely perform for a healthy French Bulldog?
Well, it works like this. When we select the parents, they undergo a basic medical examination anyway. It's not just the DNA test. We also pay attention to their breathing, movement, and behavior. There are more aggressive types, and obviously, if both parents are aggressive, we don't breed them at all. But even if only one, for example, the father is very aggressive, we still won't breed them. We remove them from the breeding program. So you have to pay close attention to these things to ensure that we breed types that are characteristic of the French Bulldog. We want to carry forward the traits that are typical of the breed. And you really have to watch out for these things, because if you don't, you'll end up breeding a French Bulldog that isn't actually a French Bulldog at all.
So, to summarize briefly, the reason you see so many sick French Bulldogs in the world, or why we can see so many sick French Bulldogs in the world, is because many people buy them from the wrong places. They buy French Bulldogs from places where these screenings haven't been done and the dogs weren't properly kept, raised, fed, or cared for. They didn't have enough space to run, and there wasn't enough time for them to be socialized or protected from running up and down stairs. And obviously, I also know they receive plenty of dietary supplements to keep them healthy.
Yes, well, buyers usually make the mistake of buying from places like that because they want to get a dog quickly. They decide they want a dog and want it there immediately, within a week, or even within a single day, and it doesn't work like that. They don't look into the background, like where the dog is from, who the parents are, or who the breeders are. These things are very important, because otherwise it just becomes a burden. That's why dogs end up in shelters, because people don't like the dog they bought, since it's nothing but trouble. So you have to pay very close attention to this. You shouldn't rush. You need to take the time to choose a dog and decide where to get it from. You should feel free to ask if the parents have genetic tests, where they are kept, and under what conditions.
I often hear a lot about backyard breeders, which are places where you can buy puppies very cheaply, very quickly, and even right on the spot. What do you personally think about them? In your opinion, is it really worth choosing a puppy from one of these breeders?
Well, it works like this. Usually those who breed this way have a full-time job where they are all day, and then they go home in the evening and check on the dogs then. So again, this isn't healthy, because the dog won't be socialized and will behave completely differently than a normal French Bulldog, or really, this applies to any kind of dog. I almost made this mistake myself when I started breeding, because I thought that breeding just consists of having a dog and another dog, and then they're just there in the garden, and then whatever happens, happens. So it doesn't work like that. And you have to pay attention. Anything can happen. You have to be there 24 hours a day with the dogs. So it's not a good solution either if we buy a dog from a place where they say they have a parent pair, but they don't even deal with that.
If I were to nitpick with you now, so okay, they don't pay attention to them, but they're still treated as family members or whatever, but what else is it that a backyard breeder like this can't give to the puppies besides not spending time with them?
They breed French Bulldogs without proper professional knowledge, so this is much more complicated than growing plants or some kind of animal production or animal breeding that isn't as important. But with dogs, that's not the point, but that they really have a long life and are healthy. And if someone doesn't pay attention to this and just breeds dogs haphazardly, so pairing any color with any color, then there can be very nasty genetic diseases. There are plenty of unwritten rules that many people don't know, like which color cannot be paired with another color. So this is just one thing, but there are plenty of things you need to know about. This really requires many years of experience. But people often say they'd like to breed French Bulldogs too and ask for my help, and we simply get stuck right at the start on where a dog should even be kept. Many people don't even know how a Frenchie is born, how the mating process works, or how to raise the puppies afterwards. So there are so many things like puppies dying during the rearing phase because people don't know what to watch out for. So there are quite a few potential pitfalls, and even if you manage to raise a puppy with great difficulty, it still likely will not be healthy if you do not pay close attention right from the very start.
But how does it differ from an easy to raise, or name a breed that's much easier to breed than the French Bulldog, a dog?
Well, those larger bodied dogs.
Like a Labrador, for example, or a Golden Retriever.
Labradors are like that, Goldens too, but you still have to pay attention to them. It's just that they raise the puppies much better. So here, you have to be very careful, because we often don't even dare leave the puppies alone with the mother since they're so tiny. But the French Bulldog is a stocky, heavier breed. She might lie on the puppies and crush them to death. She doesn't pay attention, she doesn't nurture them, so you really have to watch out for these things. A larger bodied dog somehow pays much more attention to the puppies, and you can leave them there. She raises them herself. This is just another detail, but for instance, I don't leave the little ones alone. I'm only there when I can watch them, never losing sight of them for a second while they nurse.
Yes, I remember that. When a litter is born, you're there every 3 hours, nursing them, and you basically have no day or night for the first few weeks because it requires such intense focus to ensure the puppies are cared for, protected, and loved.
Well, yes, it's exactly like raising children, except here we're talking about 6 or 7 kids who need the same attention. And that doesn't mean waking up every 3 hours. It means I barely even go to bed. You also have to take care of the mother and feed her in the meantime. It's not like I just put the food down and she either eats or she doesn't. I almost have to hand feed the mother, and then the little ones have to be placed with her and held there. You have to check if they're actually eating, just like with small children, and if one hasn't eaten, then I have to feed them myself. And it's very exhausting, especially when I have other dogs at home that also need attention. So it's very difficult. Rather, it's something that requires a whole family. For instance, a married couple would find it hard to manage this level of care for the dogs.
Okay, so it takes a lot of time to raise healthy, socialized, and affectionate French bulldogs. Besides that, you need immense knowledge, and I'm really curious, beyond how they're born or mated, what exactly requires extra expertise compared to an average dog breed?
Well, honestly, you really learn this over the years. I started out with just one single French Bulldog, and that's where I experienced everything firsthand. Obviously, I visited other breeders, and then I gathered all the knowledge. You can't really experience it just by reading about it because there's always a new problem that needs to be solved. Some people have a knack for it, some don't, but luckily I was blessed with it, and that's why I started doing this whole thing much better. But really, that was the secret, that I didn't surround myself with a ton of French Bulldogs right away, but only 1 or 2 French Bulldogs, and I could react to every single problem to the fullest, and that's how I improved more and more.
It happens very often that someone writes to us who would like a French bulldog from us. They might already be an owner, and they tell us how much money they spend on a French bulldog because they bought a sick French bulldog somewhere. Do you think, Tommy, it's really a matter of luck whether a French bulldog will be healthy or not?
Well, it's not the matter of luck. It depends on the breeders 99% of the time. So if a breeder pays attention to genetics, screenings, diseases, and care, then there's a high probability that healthy dogs will go to the owners. And this must be taken into account, that there are such available dogs that are at a really low price, and that can be tempting. But you have to watch out for that, because the breeder doesn't pay the price that another breeder pays, and that's why the price of the French Bulldog becomes high, since the breeder invested a lot of money and time, energy into raising healthy dogs. So when we see a cheap French Bulldog, you can immediately spot why the price might be low. They didn't spend enough on it. They didn't pay attention to breeding, to care, and that's how it can be managed for a French Bulldog to be cheaper. But I'll say it once more, that price isn't the deciding factor, but rather that the dog is healthy, and future owners can only ensure this by checking where they're getting the dog from. So not from a puppy mill where there are tons of mother and father dogs and they have no space. So you have to notice that the dogs aren't happy, they don't feel good, and the whole thing is really just about someone making a living from it as a second job. So you can only do this as a full-time job, in a way that you really put your heart and soul into it.
Tom, if someone buys a French bulldog from a responsible breeder, is it 100% certain that it won't get sick?
Well, it's not 100% at all. So even if a careful breeder, pays attention to everything, we really screen for everything 100%. We pay attention to everything regarding upbringing and feeding. Even then, a disease can occur that simply comes unexpectedly, like a tumor, various spinal problems due to climbing stairs, or things an owner can't pay attention to who doesn't even know they should be paying attention, or various poisonings, or car accidents, or drowning, or anything they don't even think of. These can happen, unfortunately, but fortunately fewer and fewer. We also notice as the years go by that we're doing it better and better. Unfortunately, few such cases occur.
What I see and what I'm very proud of at TomKings is that if I search online for how many French bulldogs out of 100 are sick, then I see, well, I don't know, very, very high numbers. And what's good is that in our statistics, I don't know the exact number, I'd say it's around 5%. So it's been very, very radically reduced, and that's a huge achievement. How do you think we were able to achieve this?
Well, there are many components to this. It starts from there. So with the parent pairs selected at a young age, that's where the whole story begins. So when a puppy is born, how they're treated, whether they're hand-raised or just left with the mother. So that's where it all starts. Their socialization, then the feeding, the proximity to humans. These are very important things. It's the same with humans. If someone isn't cared for, they'll be much more prone to illness. This has already been proven. And it's the same with dogs. If we pay attention to all of these things, which isn't easy, then they're much more likely to be healthy dogs and live long lives.
So if I were to summarize, I'd say that if we buy a puppy from a responsible breeder, even they can't give a divine guarantee that the puppy will be healthy, but they can radically reduce the risk of the puppy getting sick. However, if you buy a puppy from a place where they don't screen them, neither the parents nor the puppies, medical checkups are about only up to the vaccination. The food isn't chosen correctly, they aren't exercised properly, they aren't socialized properly, they aren't around people, they're locked in a small space all day long, and no one checks on them. So if you don't have the time, knowledge, energy, money, and investment, then it's almost certain the puppy will get sick. But if these are provided, then this can be radically reduced.
Exactly, and it's actually hard to tell which breeder follows these rules because everyone just goes for appearances, and it's really hard to see how someone keeps their dogs. It also matters how many minutes or hours the dogs are actually left on their own. So I think you have to live with the puppies constantly. This very much determines their behavior and their future lives as well.
Is it animal cruelty if someone doesn't buy a French Bulldog from a specialist French Bulldog breeder?
Well, I think it's animal cruelty, because for those who take up breeding, animal cruelty is happening there, since the dogs are left alone and not cared for. Basically, we're talking about a dog with a miserable fate that is suffering. So this is not good. So only someone should breed dogs who can really be there with the dog from morning to night and treats them almost like family members, because those puppies born to them will also participate as family members in a family's life. So this is important, that not only the puppies are in a loving family, but the previous generations too all carry those traits that they picked up in a loving family. So this is very important. And if this isn't there, then practically the dogs suffer, because the dog is such a social being, which really whoever hasn't had a dog doesn't know. But the dog is always there by its owner's side, and so it suffers if it can't be with them. That's also why we say that someone shouldn't even want a dog if they can't be with their dog almost all day, because it's not good that I buy a dog and leave it there, then I go home and we'll meet later, so it's not good, and the dog suffers. So I'd call it animal cruelty.
Yes, legally it might not be animal cruelty, but I see that when prospective owners write to us about the miserable fate of some French bulldogs who could have been raised for a healthy life with genetic screening, proper care, diet, and love, instead they have a very short lifespan, really just a few years, a very, very high medical costs, very, very high stress, pain, a family loss with bad feelings, then my heart sinks that this is animal cruelty and that it should end. And at TomKings, this is our mission, to have healthy, happy French Bulldogs and to give them to families who truly love them, to change this, and so that more people can enjoy that loving, goofy, funny breed that we work with.
Yes, so really, this is the most important thing, genetic screening. So dogs must be screened for as many diseases as possible. That's the basis, and this costs a lot, but it's necessary, because afterwards you have to treat the diseases, which will cost even more. So someone shouldn't even breed dogs if they don't screen the parents, because that's the most important thing. Obviously, care is the basis, keeping dogs in good conditions, but screening is at least as important.
Many people say it, and I often see it in parks, that French Bulldogs are gasping for air, and they really go down the street grunting and struggling. How typical do you think this is for the French Bulldog?
Well, lately it's becoming more and more typical, by the way, because everyone wants a French Bulldog that's wrinkly, short-nosed, and stocky. And these dogs really do grunt. So basically, a French Bulldog grunts and snorts, and the flatter the nose, the more you can hear these sounds, but to some extent this is normal. So let's not expect a French Bulldog to be like a long-nosed dog, that it runs, 20 kilometers, and then nothing, not even panting. So you have to know that the French Bulldog is like this, that for those with shorter noses, you have to be careful not to take them out in 40 degrees, because they don't like that. So this is normal. But similarly, within the breed, there are shorter nosed ones and slightly longer nosed ones. So obviously, we also mention this if they go to a place where usually it's hot. We don't recommend very short nosed French Bulldogs there. So within this, you can adjust so the dog doesn't suffer. But otherwise, there's no problem if it snorts or pants, because that comes with the breed. So there's no problem with that.
What is it that's already a problem?
Well, when we notice that the dog is reluctant to walk and is wheezing, there's a solution for this too, because an elongated soft palate, for example, is a problem. This can be solved with a relatively minor surgery, but we can't expect a French Bulldog to really be like a long-nosed dog. So I'll say it again. This is a family dog that's small, compact, and really good for everything. So it's family friendly, loves kids, likes walking, hiking, but it can't stand the extreme heat. But anyway, I don't think any dog likes the extreme heat, so there's no problem with that. A parent pair that already has a narrow nose and an inadequate palate. The trachea is small, we don't breed these, so we try to pay attention to this. Even if the demand is for a French Bulldog to be as small as possible and as wrinkled and fleshy as possible, that's the demand. We pay attention to not overdoing things because then breathing problems can really occur.
Yes, and I suggest to everyone that if you have a dog that breathes very heavily, really doesn't feel like walking, struggles, suffers, then definitely visit the vet because it might be possible to help relatively easily. And if you are buying a French Bulldog, then definitely ask the breeder about how these are screened, how they check the parents.
But yes, this can be seen even at a young age. So when they buy a puppy or even before they buy it, you can see how the puppy breathes. You can hear it. So if it runs around, you can hear in its voice if the trachea resonates or if it breathes through its mouth, through its nose. So these can be noticed. And the nose is also visible. If it's very narrow, then you shouldn't buy it. But even that can be fixed with a small surgery. So it's not such an earth-shattering thing. But if possible, then you shouldn't buy that one.
The next question is whether it's selfish if someone buys a purebred dog instead of adopting one from a shelter. I have an answer to this, a story that one of the famous American singers wanted to buy a puppy from us but didn't dare to do it and instead adopted a puppy from a shelter, and he wrote to us a lot later on to help him raise it, help him teach it so that this puppy wouldn't be aggressive, she's struggling and breaking down mentally, but no, and honestly we can't really help her. What I see is that a lot of very compassionate and well-meaning individuals adopt dogs from shelters, but for example with French Bulldogs, this might not be the best approach. Because there are a lot of dogs with mental or emotional trauma who require a significant amount of additional patience, time, and emotional energy. Now, this might sound very harsh, but if someone has the means, the time, and the energy, then it is truly a beautiful mission to help a dog with emotional trauma. I can also fully understand the specific situation when someone becomes a pet owner by making the choice to adopt a physically and emotionally healthy dog, and, for example, simply and honestly doesn't have the time to heal a traumatized dog.
Well, yes, I agree with that too. There is nothing wrong with someone not wanting a dog from a shelter. It is entirely a personal choice for every single individual where and how they want to acquire and bring home their dog.
Under what circumstances do you believe it is better to select a dog from a reputable breeder instead of a shelter?
Well, if you don't have the necessary time or patience to work with a traumatized dog because, a dog from a shelter is highly likely to be traumatized since it probably hasn't received enough attention. It's likely that it comes from a place where it was not properly cared for, and as a result, it will inevitably require a much greater amount of your daily attention. So, in general, I would recommend them to people who live alone. So for those people, such a dog is ideal. But for example, for families with children, I wouldn't really recommend it. Of course, there are exceptions at the shelter as well, so you have to look into that too. There, the experts can also tell you what kind of temperament the dog has. They will tell you whether they recommend the dog for families. They pay attention to that as well. But what I've noticed is that these are usually traumatized dogs and really suited for single owners. So I would rather recommend French Bulldogs from breeders who really pay attention to their dogs and have them regularly screened, because then it won't happen that they end up in shelters. Because with these kinds of dogs, there are only problems. Eventually, they simply stop loving them, get bored, and grow tired of constantly having to train them. So they decide to give them up to local animal shelters instead. So this is the core of the problem. This is exactly why dogs usually end up in shelters, because they were originally bought from the wrong places, where breeders did not do their job responsibly at all. They didn't pay enough attention, not even at the very first steps of the breeding process, not even when carefully selecting the parent pairs, and this negligence ultimately affects the entire litter's mental state and behavior for life. Because if you don't pay close attention to a litter, they will likely not be socialized correctly. In reality, it becomes a family member, but it's like a black sheep in the family, someone we won't love because it doesn't behave the way we expect it to.
So, to answer briefly, no, it's not selfish to buy a purebred dog or puppy. In fact, I would rather say it's a responsibility because in the long run, this could help eliminate dog shelters, besides making sure that everyone considers whether they have time for a puppy and are truly willing to take responsibility. Additionally, it would mean that there would be healthy dogs, both physically and mentally healthy, in the world, with whom there would be less hassle, less money, energy, and stress involved.
Yes, well, if you choose a dog from a good place, then the number of dogs ending up in shelters drops significantly.
Do you think it's normal to pay several thousand hard-earned dollars, $5,000 or even $6,000 or even more for a dog? Is a person who pays that much for a dog perfectly reasonable?
Well, when you first hear about it, it doesn't sound normal at all. But if you really buy a dog from a reputable breeder and pay the price for what the breeder has already paid multiple times over to ensure the dog is healthy, in the long run, it's definitely a worthwhile investment. because even a single medical examination can be incredibly expensive. Not to mention a surgery or treatments, so unfortunately you have to think ahead because these can cost a serious amount of money. This is precisely the kind of investment the breeder has already fully covered and accounted for during the breeding process, so that future owners won't have to face such problems.
Exactly. So if we were to carefully break down what makes up the total price of a French Bulldog puppy, you really can buy a French Bulldog from a backyard breeder for even $1,500. But in that case, you can be sure that the cost of healthy parents hasn't been covered. You need 2 parents or a stud service, and even a normal stud service costs a lot of money. There is absolutely no genetic screening for the biological parents, and the young puppy isn't screened either. They haven't undergone the comprehensive medical examinations required. Those essential vaccinations aren't done, and the proper nutrition and professional supervision just aren't really there at all. All of these essential things are entirely missing, and the consequence is often $10,000 or $20,000 surgeries, leading to enormous stress, many tears, constant worry, and significant physical pain. Obviously, if someone has a critically ill puppy or a sick French Bulldog, they are just as deeply emotionally attached to them. But there is nothing more stressful than when a sick French Bulldog is resting right there in your lap, and you're agonizing over the decision of whether to pay that $20,000 or not. And from this point of view, from this perspective, for me, it's not the person who pays $6,000 for a French Bulldog who's crazy, but the one who pays $1,500.
It's pretty much down to luck whether their dog gets sick or not. With a responsible breeder, it's no longer down to luck. There's a really serious background to ensuring that a dog is truly healthy. They're examined almost more thoroughly than humans are, precisely because some surgeries are more expensive than for a human. So you have to be very careful, because we can pay the price if we buy a puppy from the wrong place.
So that's it for today's show. Thanks, Tommy, for being here. I think that talking about this has definitely supported our mission to have healthy French Bulldogs, to have responsible breeders, and for owners to buy French Bulldogs only and exclusively from responsible breeders. Obviously, this was the first show, so I'm sure we can still improve a lot, but I think we've made a start, and that's what matters, and we'll be back soon with the next episode.
I also want to thank you for having me. I hope I was able to give some useful advice, and as you mentioned, we'll be back with more useful content in the future.
Thank you for being here. Subscribe to our channel. We'll be back soon with the next episode.